adding to your gun control agenda?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, but I mean, listen, I don't think we lack for great ideas. As I've said many times, we've been having great ideas for decades. The problem is that Congress has not had the courage to act. And that is why, from the beginning, I have said, my agenda includes attempting to get Congress to act, but if they don't within the first 100 days of my administration, I'm going to take executive action. Because what we need is action.
Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the Democratic nominee, has said that by executive order, she wants to take action on guns. And I don't know if that means confiscation or extra laws or whatever, but what does gun confiscation look like? I can't imagine what would happen if government agents, and that could be anybody from local police to sheriff's department to federal agents, decided that they were going to take guns from Americans. First of all, where would it start and what would they do? But second of all, we're looking at some pretty bad results over the years. We're seeing it now in Venezuela, with the Venezuelan election right now, and the government crackdown. It was, 2012 that the people of Venezuela were asked to give up their firearms in the name of public safety, and now the Venezuelan president is saying he won the election and he's using his firearms against people who don't have firearms. So worst case scenario, what kind of craziness are we looking at?
Well, let's talk about what's the roadmap to complete confiscation. It typically starts with a registry. And by typically, I mean almost always. Now, keep in mind that in second, third world countries where, frankly, the bureaucracies and the government lack the precision and the capacity to make registrations, then they may skip that step.
Yeah, then it becomes more of a blunt instrument.
Yes. But where they have that ability, they start with universal registration. Okay, so it's a lot easier to obviously confiscate weapons and seize weapons should push come to shove, which it often does when you know where they are and who has them, right? So registration, step one, okay? Step two then is maybe there's some sort of buyback, like what we've seen in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere. Maybe they just skip that and you just have X amount of time. Maybe you have something like where you have in Canada, where it's, okay, you can hang on to your firearms, but you're not allowed to sell them, and when you die, they go to the government or something like that, right? That's about as soft as you can get.
And for me, that is the long-term play. That is the making sure nobody notices they're taking your gun, as if the people aren't paying attention, that, oh yeah, you can keep your guns until you die and then they just go away. Well, maybe people won't argue about that. I'm hoping that people in America will argue about that.
I think a lot less people would argue about that. That's right. The sad part, because they're like, yeah, I'm okay. It is what it is, right? So I absolutely believe that there's a segment of folks who that is the difference to get them on board, as long as they are perhaps not as directly impacted, right? So you go from registration to where you're freezing where firearms are, and then there's some sort of how do we get them out of the populace. So you see in Western democracies and republics, you see things like that, where it's buybacks or there's some sort of, we'll call it a Canadian-like sunset provision. Elsewhere, they start to get more heavy-handed, right? Elsewhere, you get into roundups, you get into confiscations, you get into, it's the death penalty if you have this, it's mandatory prison if you have this, you're an enemy of the people, you're an enemy of the state if you have this. Only counter-revolutionaries have firearms outside of course, revolutionaries. So you're starting to get into that kind of space, and things go really, really poorly, really, really fast. And even in the Western Hemisphere, where we've seen, like for instance, England, who made through a succession of laws across, really starting after World War I and culminating in the 1980s, you saw, with the exception of hunting shotguns and things kind of like that, you really saw a ban on virtually all handguns. And what happened? Violence went up.
Right.
What happened? Homicides went up. Oh, huh. It's like they don't necessarily have as much to do with one another as maybe everybody thought.
And to the point now in England that they are marketing knives without pointy tips because they think that someone's not going to slash. They have a huge increase in knife crime. The crime keeps going up. It comes around as being really clear that it's not the gun, and we get back to that cliche of gun control is more about control than about guns. It's about the elements of controlling the population.
Well, it also gets to your perspective, and this is what I think it comes down to, and this is more philosophical, not political per se, of where are you putting the emphasis on society? Is the emphasis on the community? Because typically people who look at things on the group level tend to think in very utilitarian terms of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And well, basically off with those people if it helps the group out, right? Things like that, utilitarian thinking of kind of calculating how you go about things. People who tend to think that way often have no to little regard for the individual rights and conception, okay? And I think that we have a group of folks in our society, as well as globally, who think that way. At the other end of the equation, you have people who, and this is really true particularly of the Western English Commonwealth tradition, so England, Canada, the United States, Australia, but particularly the United States. These are cultures and civilizations that are much more based around the premise of the individuals being sovereign. And I don't mean sovereign in a, you can't stop me, Mr. Police Officer, because I'm traveling, not driving, and all that kind of stuff. I mean sovereign in the sense that, no, the needs of the one can override. We are all worse when we degrade the place of the individual in our society. We all lose something. We are not better as a group if we erode the individual in favor of what we think will calculate a better outcome. It's actually the reverse. We have a worse group when we prioritize the group over the individual, as compared to we have a better group where we prioritize the individual over the group. It's very counterintuitive, and you run into the school bus, the train of, you have all the utilitarian thinker people who are just saying, well, just give up all your firearms, and well, I mean, there'll clearly be less violence and less guns if there's less violence, less homicides, and less firearm homicides if there's less guns, right? So why don't we just ban all guns? That's utilitarian thinking.
Right, and it falls into that point then of when they ban the guns, then all the other rights that follow, the right to be free of unreasonable searches and things like that, those all have to go away as well. It just occurred to me while we were talking about this, turning this toward a legal side of what's happening. Let's just say there is a administration, a Harris administration that decides to use executive order to implement some sort of gun control. Mm-hmm. Legally, can people file suit against or try to stop the implementation of an executive order? How does that work out? I assume it's going to go through to the Supreme Court to say, wait a minute, President, you can't just do anything you want by executive order. How can executive orders be countermanded?
Yeah, well, step one is we have to see what the executive order is. Because, for instance, if she just says, hey, I'm executive ordering, we're striking the Second Amendment. Okay, well, that's not going to go very far.
Yeah, that can't happen.
Right. Realistically, even she won't overreach for that, should she become president. More likely, what we would see are executive orders targeting imports of firearms, ammunition, and accessories, doing things like that, and of course appointing hyper-aggressive anti-2A politicians into positions of power in key agencies like the ATF. We would see a promotion of anti-2A judges across the federal judiciary. Keep in mind, the federal judiciary, whether we're talking about at the district court level, right? So there's about 94 federal district trial courts. So this is where if you charge with a federal crime, you're going in front of one of these courts. Then there's 13 federal circuit courts, okay? And then we've got one United States Supreme Court. There's other courts too, you know, there's military courts, there's bankruptcy courts and patent courts and all this other kind of stuff. But we're focused right now on, you know, our side of the universe, okay? All these judges are appointed for life. So what you see is a gradual salting of the judiciary as these positions come available, either through death and retirement or through the creation of new positions, that whoever is the president gets to nominate the individuals. Now, they've got to get through the Senate, but generally speaking, it doesn't change the fact that if you've got a right-wing president and a left-wing Senate, you're still going to be getting right-wing judges. Maybe the Senate will be able to knock some of them out. You know, they'll get borked, so to speak, or
Right.
something like that. But, and the same thing's true the other way around, right? If you have a left-wing president and a right-wing Senate, you're still going to be getting left-wing judges who, if recent history is any note, will generally be more hostile to the Second Amendment. So that is the long-term take on this. Because you asked, what can the president effectively do?
Right, and how could the citizenry stop the president from doing that? Is
voting, number one.
Yeah, elections have consequences.
Elections have consequences, number one. Number two is talking to people. That's really part 1A, right? Talking to people, mobilizing. Sportsmen and gun owners as a group is one of the lowest voting blocks. By ratio, we way undervote nationally.
Right.
There's way less gun owners. I think through just facing decades of bitterness and being targeted and all that, it's easy to understand why gun owners would not want to vote. It's also extremely hard to understand why gun owners would not vote. All in the same sentence. It's very easy and difficult to understand all at once. But you need to get out there and vote. And whether you're on the right or the left, you need to make sure that you're trying to push a pro-2A advocacy. If you're on the right, it's generally a little bit more baked in, but you need to understand, and I would ask that please let your politicians know how important 2A is, how important it is that we have 2A policies and all this other kind of stuff. Then on the left, you need to be speaking up to make sure that no, there is a significant rise in the pro-2A left crowd. And we will see to what degree that mainstreams. Right now, that is certainly not mainstream.
No, not mainstream in the left.
Yes.
I don't want to use political party names or anything like that, but people who are farther on the left tend to put gun control way down on their list of stuff that they're angry about and want changed. And we need to remind people. You're absolutely right. We need to remind people that the Second Amendment helps them secure all the rest of the freedoms that they hold so dear. So,
I'm not one to usually praise Karl Marx, but I will say he was absolutely right when he said, and he recognized the importance of the people being armed, because he said something to the effect of the people must never under any circumstances be disarmed. He understood, as did Mao, right, the fact that all power flows out to the barrel of a rifle, something like that.
yep.
People who are into Machiavellian, Thucydides, realpolitik, right? Of this is the way the world works. We're stripping off all the varnish, right? They understand that speech and weapons are the two safeguards, the two ultimate safeguards. We can talk about the ballot box and the voting box and so forth, but at the end of the day, speech and weapons are the two bulwarks of our individual rights and freedoms.
And you see that immediately, politicians who want to control large groups of people immediately try to control the press, the speech, and how they're communicating, and then immediately take away their firearms. And once they get to that point, you have places like North Korea and Venezuela and all the other list of countries where, Cambodia, where things have just gone wildly out of control, and suddenly the citizens don't like it anymore. I mean, I still remember the days when every leftist actor in America thought Venezuela was utopia,
right,
and was wonderful, and now people are like, whoa, what happened in Venezuela? Well, you saw the end result of socialism, and now the people have given up their guns and they can't do anything about it.
We'll see where this all ends up, but for the time being, Kevin, I've got some concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again for your insights, Tom. Always good talking to you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Did you know we have a secret gun giveaway going on right now you can enter for free? But it ends really soon. Just click the link in the description below to reveal which brand new gun you could win.